For Louisiana versus all y'all, Jared Rose with Raymond Partsch the third of ESPN Southwest Louisiana, who just this week wrote a column for the website DBU not living up to its lofty standards, hitting on the topic of the week for LSU football after an absolutely abysmal showing, particularly on that side of the ball up in Oxford in a 55-49 loss to Ole Miss. Ray, I mean, I don't know that we have to explain to folks what that means that watch that game, but take me through it, just kind of what caught your attention and what you looked at as you wrote that column.
It just wasn't the game against Ole Miss, which was atrocious, right? 706 yards is the most yards they've given up ever in program history. Good. They've been playing football for more than 100 years. So it's been a minute, right? So, and it makes you think of the Bo Pelini 2020 season. That was just awful. There's so many things that stand out, and it's been the whole season, right? They have given up the second most points through 5 games in program history behind that 2020 team. And LSU already played Grambling on the schedule this year. So think about that. Like, that wasn't a close game. And Mississippi State wasn't a close game. So what I'm noticing when I watch this team, they're not playing man coverage, right? We know this. Matt House has that defense in a way where, whether it's because of the limitations of his defensive backs or whatever it might be, they're playing soft zone, right? So they're taking bad angles to the ball. They're not tackling properly. They're not in position. And it just wasn't Ole Miss. We're going to focus on Ole Miss because it was the most recent game. But look what Arkansas did. Arkansas does not have a ton of skill position guys. Besides KJ. KJ is special. He's big. He's Big Ben for Arkansas. That's what he is. Big, huge guy like me, right? 250, 60 pounds. That's great. But you shouldn't be letting Arkansas freshman tight end and wide receivers running right past you. So they're not understanding the scheme. That's what it seems like to me. They're taking bad angles. They're not tackling properly. And they're not in position to make plays. Like, and that's the thing that stands out to me more than anything, as someone who first covered an LSU game for a newspaper back when Corey Webster, the godfather of DBU, was still playing, right? To see the secondary have the struggles that they do, we're almost halfway through the regular season. They should be getting better. You think of that 2019 national championship team, record-setting offense, maybe the best offense we've ever seen in college football. Even though Tommy Frazier in Nebraska would have something to say about that in 1995. I'm an old man. I remember these things. But best offense we've ever seen. That defense wasn't great that year early on, but remember, about halfway through the season, Grant Delpit got a little healthy, and they started making plays, and they started forcing turnovers. And they were not an elite defense by any stretch of the imagination, but you had Delpit and Stingley repping DBU. Do you see any guys right now that are doing that? And it's not a knock on the kids. And I want to make sure that that comes across, because some people read my column at ESPN Southwest Louisiana.com, and they're like, well, they're good players, Jared. They're good players. They're not DBU players. There's a difference, right? There's a difference. There's the best athlete I've ever seen play at LSU, Patrick Peterson, and I'll die on that hill. Honey Badger, Mo Claiborne, Derek Stingley Jr., Jamal Adams. Go through the list. Those guys were physical, athletic, and fast. They could run 4.4, 4.5 at the slowest. They don't have those guys. They just don't have those guys on the back end, and it's costing them games. It's cost them 2 games already, and it may cost them more and could keep them out from going to Atlanta and playing for the SEC championship.
You hit on, a lot of different aspects of things that I've looked at. I think we all knew going into the season that secondary was a pivotal area. We were watching to see what could they be, and I don't think that they've even come close to, I think in a lot of people's minds, the floor of what the expectations were. You knew it was going to be some ups and downs, some growing pains and whatnot. I was optimistic that they could be good enough, and they certainly haven't been. But I think part of that is, you talk about some of the scheme dynamics. This is a defense that, from a scheme standpoint, has been built on press man coverage and getting after people, long, fast, physical corners, and a defensive front seven that is getting after opponents and forcing you to not have a lot of time to throw the ball. Instead, we're watching 7 and 8 man drops into zone coverage and not having a ton of success, at least not consistently, getting after opponents and letting the weakness of the team be expected to cover out there for extended period of times and just get picked apart. And then at that point, you see everything you talk about where it's just bad angles all over the place, no one within 8 yards somehow still, and running free through the secondary.
There's multiple things here going on with this defense this year, right? First of all, look back at the tape of the Ole Miss game. Why are they so far off the ball?
Yeah.
Just you watch it and you go, why are you like a yard off the ball here? I don't understand. The defensive line, it's been an under the radar problem that they have not been as dominant as we thought they would. Wingo, Mason Smith's back. You have all these guys in the front seven. It hasn't worked out. Defensive line hasn't been terrible, but they haven't been able to overcompensate for the back end's issues, right? And we were thinking, well, they'll be straight up front in the front seven. That'll help out the young guys, these new guys that have a ton of playing experience. And that's where I differ with Brian Kelly, where he said, well, I got a lot of inexperienced guys. No, you don't. You have a lot of guys that haven't played in the SEC. Playing in the Southland Conference USA, that ain't the SEC. And I'm not saying that to be braggadocious because I know a lot of people hate the SEC and SEC bias. No, there's a difference. You got a ton of future first and second round guys you're facing off every week in the SEC, except for when you play Vandy. Sorry, Vandy. So you thought that would kind of help you, but that hasn't been the case. Defensive line has underperformed, and their decision to do what they did with Harold Perkins, like I just look, my football career ended in glorious fashion playing for Dutchtown Middle School back in the day. Okay, when I got on campus at East Ascension, I looked around, I had hit my growth spurt, and I was like, I ain't doing this, right? I'll play baseball. So I'm not a football star by any stretch of the imagination. When you don't put your best players in the position to succeed, your best playmakers. Harold Perkins is the best player they got on that team, best athlete they have on that team. Jaden Daniels has been phenomenal. But if you're just telling me about a guy that I look at and I go, that's the best football player they have, it's Harold Perkins. He's been nowhere. They haven't used him. They're dropping him in coverage. This guy's Micah Parsons. And they're having him try to be middle linebacker. Like they're trying to have him be Jonathan Vilma. Why? Why? So that kind of puts you behind the 8 ball. Defensive line not doing its job as well. And then look, they got away with it last year. Remember last year? Had a McNeese guy, had a Louisiana Raging Cajun. Neither one of them tore it up. They weren't dominant players. They weren't all conference players. But they did good enough to handle being on the back end. And for Brian Kelly, coming in late, taking over a roster with less than 40 scholarship players, having a wide receiver have to play quarterback in a bowl game, which is a ridiculous thing that they were forced to do. And the cupboard was bare when he took over. Let's be fair. Coach O enjoyed that victory lap a little too much and, didn't take care of his house. So you're like, okay, yeah, you're going to have to depend on a guy from the Southland, and you're going to have to depend on a guy from the Sun Belt to come in. Okay. I think the problem for a lot of folks, Jared, and you and I have talked about this off the air, is why didn't you get guys the second cycle? And it almost was treated as an afterthought, and I wrote that in my column. Brian Kelly killed it. Got a star transfer quarterback out of the portal. Nailed it. Jaden Daniels is just tremendous. Offensive line. I go in the portal. I get a couple of guys. I go get the best offensive line prospect in the state of Louisiana, and Will Campbell. Shout out to Neville. Bring him down. Done. Right? He can find 18 different running backs that can average 3.4 yards a pop. Done. Great. Wide receivers, not a problem. Front seven, he's brought in impact guys. Not a problem. It's almost as if the secondary was treated as an afterthought. Like, oh, okay, well, we'll get some guys. And then they missed out on some in-state prospects, which you and I can debate whether or not they were really even in contention for those guys. There was a coaching change and some other things, and, down from Westgate all the way up to North Louisiana. But you missed out on the guys that were supposed to come in and help you. Now, the kid from Acadiana High, I think, should get more reps because I think he has the potential to be good for LSU. but you missed out. So you went into the portal again. It almost felt like, when you're preparing for a test and you go over the things, you're like, yeah, I studied this. Oh, yeah, I got to do my essay. Well, let me BS something and write 150 words and try to get a passing grade. And that's how it felt like they treated the secondary. And Andre Sam, I like Andre. I covered Andre at McNeese. He's a good Southland Conference player. He didn't even start all that much at Marshall. You got him starting for you. Like a guy that wasn't a full-time starter at Marshall is starting for LSU at DBU. I like Zy Alexander. I covered him in high school as well at Lowerville. Good kid, good player. You're putting him in a position to go one-on-one with guys like Keon Coleman or going up against whatever 18 bazillion receivers Blaine Kiffin has in his back pocket. You're not putting those guys in a position to succeed. Deuce Chestnut was brought in supposed to be the number 2 corner. He played at Syracuse, bro. Like, I'm not. If we're talking 80s, 90s, 2000s basketball, then that's great. We're talking about football at Syracuse. And Donovan McNabb didn't play there recently. That's what you're doing. And you're putting those kids out there and you're not putting them in a position to succeed. And Brian Kelly's got to do something different. The one glaring weakness in his recruiting, DBs. And Corey Raymond was an assistant coach for multiple coaches at LSU, right? And he left and he came back. And sometimes people get upset when you say Corey Raymond, he led DBU, and some people, oh, well, he didn't start DBU. Well, Corey played at LSU and he played defensive back at LSU, and then he was an assistant coach at LSU and helped them win titles. But the great thing about Corey is that not only could he recruit, and he didn't hit on all of them, Jared. They'd go after, they missed on some guys. They missed on a certain former NFL son who ended up going to Alabama, right? At the tail end of his time with O. But he got Derek Stingley Jr. And he helped get other guys. And the other thing about Corey, and I'll tell this story about Corey and why he was so fundamentally important to LSU. I was working at the Daily Iberian down in New Iberia. And I wanted to do a story on Corey because Corey's from the Berry. So I'm interviewing players after an LSU football game because I was doing the long form feature on them. And I asked Battle, if you remember, pretty good safety for LSU, right? Kid out of Miami. Mm-hmm. And I asked him, I said, hey, we're just talking about coach and what he teaches and everything like that. And we're just having a conversation, just he and I. It's one of those weird moments in the bowels of Tiger Stadium where all of a sudden you just turn around and it's just you and the kid talking. And I go, tell me about why you decided to come to LSU, because he had all those offers. And he's like, I'll tell you. He goes, my first time talking with Coach Raymond. I said, okay. He said, everyone been coming to me telling me how great I was and how I was a stud and I was going to do this and I was going to start and so forth and so forth. And they were just blowing me up. He goes, the first thing Coach Raymond did when he came into my house, he put on tape and he started breaking down the things I did wrong. Hey, you should have done this. Why did you let your guy take a step this way? This right here. And he said, Battle said he got broken down by Coach Raymond for like 15 to 20 minutes. And he said that's when he knew he wanted to go play for Corey. That's when he knew he wanted to go play for LSU, because he was going to get the coaching and the development to go from high school kid to starter in the SEC and have a chance to play in the NFL. Right now, LSU doesn't have that on their staff.
That's also the mentality that you want from the guys that you're recruiting too, is to see that and embrace that and want to be coached up and not told that everything they do is great.
Correct.
And that's most of the guys that came through LSU for that decade-long Corey's second stint. A lot of people had their hands in building DBU, but Corey was there 2 different stints, and the second stint was a decade. And we're talking about a thing that has existed for 20 years, going back to Corey Webster's days. And most of the guys that came through in that stretch have those stories about Corey, guys that wanted to be at LSU because Corey was there, and a top DB prospect in this 24 class that's currently committed to Florida, when asking him before the season, said, yeah, it's tough. LSU is DBU, but to me, LSU is DBU largely because of what Corey Raymond was doing there. And so I want to go play for Corey Raymond in Gainesville.
Correct, right? And look, Billy Napier was smart when Brian Kelly and Corey Raymond decided to part ways. And we know that Brian wanted to put his own stamp on the program. He'll only retain one coach, carry over, and he wanted a clean slate. I think that was a misstep, right? And I think in hindsight, Brian Kelly probably regrets not retaining Corey Raymond and figuring out a way to have a guy that had so much success. Billy Napier scooped him up, right? And Billy's like, oh, I get Corey Raymond. Great, come on down. Whether it's Corey, whoever it is, a decision is going to have to be made this offseason. Because look, Brian Kelly's a good coach. A lot of people are upset with him. A lot of people say, well, he doesn't win big. Brian Kelly's a good coach. He's won at every level. He's a good recruiter for certain position groups. DB is not his strong suit. He's got to get somebody in there, whether it's Corey Raymond or whoever it might be, Jared. It's got to be a guy with Louisiana ties, because that's the other part of that. It's DBU, and you get guys to come in from out of state, but a lot of that pride for those guys that rep that are from here. That's the other part of that. So, like, you can't be having some Midwestern dude coming in trying to lead DBU, renaissance. You can't do that. You're going to have to bring someone that's got ties to the program, or at least ties to the state, that understands what that means and can tell that kid, if you come here, you're going to be part of that fraternity. You're going to be part of that fraternity that had Corey Webster, Ryan Clark, even a little before Corey, right? A little bit earlier. But all those guys that came after, all those guys, you can be part of that. You need someone that can sell those kids on that you can come be part of that. Because right now, it's just not there. And once again, we can blame, the kids. Look, when you take poor angles on tackling, that usually means you've gotten beat, which usually means you don't have the speed to keep up. Right? That's the honest thing about that. Or you've been out of position. Now, if you're a really athletic kid, you can make up ground because of your speed, and you can make yourself look better than maybe you are. If you get beat, you can, make up that ground. But they got to fix this, because Kelly has proven to you he knows offense, right? He knows offense. He knows offensive line. Those are two huge things you can check off your boxes. Running backs too. Offense is going to get taken care of. And when Jaden leaves, Nuss Bus will take over, and he will be slinging it like Brett Favre all over the field in triple coverage. It'll be maddening, but he'll put up a ton of yards. Offense will be fine. Bringing in Pete Jenkins to help the defense, that's smart. Whatever role that's going to be, right, as a consultant, essentially an analyst, that will help. But you need, if Brian Kelly wants to truly, truly compete and win SEC championships and get into the college football playoff, which expands next year to 12 teams, he's got to figure out the secondary. Because you can't do this thing of, let's just go to the portal and get Southland and Sunbelt guys to come here. No. If you want to beat Alabama routinely and Ole Miss, A&M, Georgia, Tennessee, you have to have the dogs on the back end of the defense. If you don't, you're going to have very good seasons of winning 8, 9, 10 games, but you're not going to win championships, period. You're just not.
That's part of what's been so confusing to me over the last month as well, is since the Florida State game, we've heard so much of, and as you pointed out, it's not necessarily completely accurate. You've heard so much of, these are young guys, they're still learning, developing. We knew it was going to be a process, et cetera, et cetera. The entirety of fall camp, everyone we talked to talked about this as a team that has a chance to go compete for a national championship. And those two framings don't jive at all. If you knew that this was a team that it was going to take time to get these corners and the secondary to where they can compete at an SEC level, and that you were concerned about them. And Brian Kelly's used the term red flags with this team because of so many new faces from the transfer portal. Then why were we talking so much about that level of expectation going in, and then letting the fan base be completely shocked and taken aback by the performance in Orlando?
Two things. I think they got caught up in the whole second-year national championship thing, right? Kim Mulkey wins a national title in year number 2. She uses a transfer portal like a master, like a boss, to win one. Jay Johnson utilizes the transfer portal like a boss, wins a national title in year 2. So all of a sudden, there's a level of expectations on the football program where it probably shouldn't have been. I think the victory over Alabama with the 2-point conversion, I think, colored everyone's perception the wrong way. Because if you go back and you really look at last season, you see a wildly inconsistent team, right? You and I were there for most of those games. We saw this team overcome the slow start against Florida State and start putting together some wins. And then I was there in Tiger Stadium to see Tennessee skull drug them for one of the worst losses that in Tiger Stadium for LSU to suffer that wasn't against Florida or Alabama in the last 25 years. Then you see them bounce back and they beat Alabama in dramatic fashion. And everyone's like, oh, you slayed the Red Menace in Tuscaloosa. All is well. What happened in College Station? I'll tell you if you needed a reminder, because I was there in the swaying press box. I'm like, this is an engineering school. Why is this happening? That's a discussion for another day. But I enjoyed my time in College Station. But then you lay a complete egg. You look lifeless. You don't look prepared against a team, an A&M, that wasn't going to a bowl game and looked like they had quit on their coach. And then you beat a Purdue team without their wide receiver and out their coach and without their quarterback. Oh, okay. In the bowl game. So it was very up and down. And you bring in these guys, and some of those transfers, by the way, came in for spring. But then it just kind of hyped in, hey, we won 10 games last year. We played for the SEC championship. We forget how bad they looked against Georgia. But to be fair, everyone looked bad against Georgia. And you forget about the inconsistencies. You forget about all those things. You just buy into, hey, and we talk about all the time, usually 3 to 4 years. That's what Saban needed. That's what Les needed. That's what O needed. And we're trying to put them in a position that there should be a national championship contender. And they got exposed against Florida State. And you're like, ooh. But for any of us that went to practices, what happened in those practices in the fall? The wide receivers were burning those DBs every day. Every day we kept hearing reports about Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas just 50, 60, 70-yard touchdowns. And I think we tricked ourselves. The media did, and I think the team did. Oh, well, we got 2 of the best wide receivers in the country, and they do. Those are 2 guys that are going to be playing on Sunday. But it kind of made you believe, oh, they're just that good, the wide receivers are. The DBs will be fine when they play other guys that don't play for LSU. And what did Opelousas' own Keon Coleman do in that opener? He just mossed guys. Like, Florida State just bodied them and said, okay, we're more physical, we're more athletic, and we're quicker than you are. And you look at their schedule, Jared, and you go, okay, well, who else is going to give them this type of threat? Missouri has a very efficient offense. I know it's ranked highly. I get all that. I think LSU wins that game easily on Saturday. I do. I just LSU's always, they're classic in their regard of, we get embarrassed, we come back and we have a good performance. They always do. But they'll get tested a little bit because Missouri likes to pass the ball. Now, Missouri doesn't have the dynamic playmakers that LSU has. So Missouri's not going to be able to win a track meet. You're not going to get really threatened by Army or Georgia State. That's not going to happen. Auburn, Hugh Freeze doesn't have enough time, even though they got some defensive help against Georgia. They looked terrible against A&M. Alabama, okay, the quarterback's playing better, and their defense is far more physical now than it was earlier in the season. But they have one of the worst offensive lines in the country. So you probably can win a track meet with Alabama. So who's left on the schedule that in that notion of, are we going to face an offense that's going to be able to be as prolific as us and put up 50 points? You probably don't face one. Maybe A&M, I don't know. Maybe, you never do know. So you still have everything in front of you, but I ask you this question. Let's say they run the table. let's say they win the West and they meet Georgia again in the SEC title and they lose, right? It's going to feel a lot like you're going to be similar numbers, similar win losses like you did last year, right? But it's going to feel a lot different, isn't it? If you're the LSU fan, it's going to feel a lot different because last year you exceeded expectations. You exceeded expectations, got to 10 wins, played for a conference championship, went to a bowl game. This year, if you do the same thing, it's going to feel underwhelming. But in the the God's eye view of things, it's really just another stepping stone for year 3. But LSU fan is disappointed right now, and look, I understand it, but the fraternity brothers of DBU are not happy either, right? And they're clapping at each other on social media like Jai Eugene Sr. and Ryan Clark did. And there's been a lot of grumbling and kind of talk throughout the whole season from the Florida State game on. You could see this team win out. I could see this team lose 2 more games. It wouldn't surprise me either way. It just really wouldn't, because you're asking the offense, you're asking Jaden Daniels and company to have to put up 45 points a game. Like, it's a Mike Leach Texas Tech team is what they have right now. That's what they have. We're going to put up a lot of points because we need to, because we can't stop anybody on defense. And for LSU folks, that's a tough pill to swallow, man. It's a tough pill to swallow.
It felt like a minor miracle that they still had a chance to win that game at the end offensively. What they had done offensively, despite everything defensively, and what we've seen, they've kept doing largely the same things that we were complaining about with all the cushions. And so, do you expect this to have been at Ole Miss enough of a wake up call, and maybe Pete Jenkins coming back, at least hopefully gets guys lined up correctly up front? Do you expect to see some things change in terms of what they're doing with these guys and putting them in better positions this Saturday moving forward to hopefully improve the rest of the way? Or are we going to be watching a lot more of this soft cushion at every level?
I think what you're going to see, Pete's going to have an immediate impact. I think you're going to see them play closer to the line of scrimmage. First of all, Pete's going to look at that and he's probably going to just stroke out. What?
It's a great start.
He's just going to do that, right? He's not going to be happy about that. He's going to help Mason Smith, who I think is physically not where he needs to be. I think he's still a little hampered. You can just tell he's not the guy yet. I think Jenkins is going to get the most out of that front 7. I think he's going to have a come to baby Jesus meeting with Brian Kelly and Matt House and going, hey, the guy that looks like Micah Parsons, let's let him be Micah Parsons. Stop dropping Harold Perkins into coverage. Stop trying to make him a nickel corner. Stop it. Just let him rush the passer. That's what he's great at. That's like asking me to be a sponsor for, a hair product. It's dumb. Don't do that. I'm bald. Just accept what you are. So I think Pete will make a difference there. I think it's going to help. I think it's going to help the back end of the secondary. Am I still anticipating to see LSU's defense give up around 24, 25, 26 points a game? Yeah. Now, is that good enough to win the rest of your games? Yeah.
Probably so. Yeah.
Probably so. Are you going to be DBU? No. But that leads me to my next point. How important, because you're the recruiting guru, and I trust your instincts on this because you're connected and have been for years, by the way. Shout out to you for that. Do they have enough guys in the pipeline coming to say, okay, that's going to fix itself? Or is it making a change on staff and bringing in someone like a Corey Raymond or somebody like that, priority number 1, if they do want to shift things?
I do like what they have coming in this 24 class. And I mean, they've got a commitment even for 25 already. I like some of the work they've done. I also expect some changes probably, especially if we don't see some drastic differences over the next couple of months of play. I think I do expect you to be looking at some changes, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. come December or January, or whenever they can sort those things out.
But then that also, to your point though, let's say they do make a change. And let's say they bring back Corey or whoever. They bring in someone that's going to help revitalize DBU.
And I do think it would be, whether they could convince Corey to come back, I think they will have an addition to that staff with strong Louisiana ties.
Correct. But you're not going to make that move until December. So you're going to miss the early signing period where most of the guys now sign. So you're going to have to put in the work, right? Like that's the thing. When these things go off the rails, it takes a while. Everyone says, oh, it's a quick fix. And we've kind of conditioned ourselves, Jared, that in the transfer portal age, we'll just go get a guy in the portal. He'll be fine. Well, no, like those guys that came through DBU, the other thing that does, and you've brought this up before, and I'll bring it up too. A lot of those guys, those great Jim Thorpe Award winners, All-Americans, first-round draft picks, they didn't play a whole lot as freshmen, did they? They were brought into the system. They were coached. They sat their turn. They were mentored by the older cats on the roster to show them what it means to rep DBU and what you got to put in the off season on a Monday when no one's looking, what you got to do to be able to play on that level. And then when it was their time to be thrust into late into their freshman years, or most cases as sophomores, guess what? They could play. That's the thing, too, that I think is missing, is that you have some older guys on the team like a Major Burns and others that are good guys or good captain guys, but you're forcing like these guys that have come in like Zai or Andre, and I know Andre's the last year of eligibility, so that doesn't apply here, but like those guys should sit. In a best case scenario, you would have them come in and, yeah, you could transfer in, but hey, young buck, you're going to learn how we do things here. And we're not going to throw you out to the wolves because we don't want to damage your confidence. We want to build you up the right way and make you feel like every time you put on the purple and gold, you're going to dominate a game. They didn't do that. They're like, hey, here you go, kid from Syracuse. Welcome to the SEC. Hey, guy from Southeastern Louisiana. Welcome to the SEC. And you're not doing those kids any favors by doing that. You're just not.
And that dynamic is part of why guys like Tyron stood out so much, were such a story, is because his ascent was occurring during his freshman year. And so by the time you get to November, look at this freshman who's already exceeding expectations by doing this as a freshman instead of needing that full year or a second year or beyond. And right now you mentioned some of the transfers. They've got a kid from Rummel and Ashton Stamps who I really liked as a prospect, never expected to be called upon as one of their top corners as a true freshman in September.
Correct. And to that other point, who did Honey Badger have on that team to help him?
Yeah.
Number 7, it's Patrick Peterson, right? That's his big brother. That helped him not only at LSU, but then would help him with the Arizona Cardinals and get that pro career on track after it looked like it may not happen. You need those guys, and right now they don't have that, right? And can it get back there? Absolutely. A couple good recruiting cycles, this, it can do that, but it's not going to happen overnight. And, I think maybe there could be some hope the rest of the season, Jared. Sage Ryan had a good game against Ole Miss. Okay, the kid from Lafayette Christian Academy, former Mr. Football in the state. He's had an inconsistent career to this point. Part of that's been injuries, right? And part of that's he's a little undersized for what they're asking him to do. But he had a good game. Pro Football Focus graded him out as the best DB in that game. He had a good game against Ole Miss. Can maybe Sage have this kind of late career ascension? Well, if you have that, then you have these other younger guys there too that where maybe you can build something. Maybe Sage, even in a loss, can build off of what he did against Ole Miss and start being a guy that they can depend on. But it's a lot of work ahead, man. It's a lot of work. And, you get a chance every week to prove yourself and to get better, but you also have a chance every week to prove that you're still struggling. And that's where LSU's at right now.
We get to see Saturday morning where they're at right now, up in Columbia, Missouri. Ray,
Man, they're
appreciate you, man.
sold out. They're amped for this game up in Columbia.
They should.
Look,
They should be.
yeah,
Their offense has been good. They should be licking their chops and realizing this is an opportunity to beat an LSU team that they don't have or haven't thus far had a lot of opportunities to beat.
I will just say this. I will just say this. If LSU somehow finds a way to lose that game, bruh, the phone lines here at the station are going to just light up. It is going to be the sky is falling. Oh my God, get all these guys out of here. I can't believe this. They're already that way now. But if you lose to Mizzou, like it's one thing to
Yeah.
lose to Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. If you lose to Mizzou, now undefeated Mizzou team ranked in the top 25. Good offense. Eli Drinkwitz, I do believe, is off the hot seat now. There were some rumblings about that in the offseason. The head coach there for the Tigers that play in Columbia. But look, it does feel like a get-right game. But I would say this to LSU fans. You're not going to see DBU the rest of the year. You're going to see them make strides. That's what you can hope for. And just hope not to get embarrassed, right? Because we're 5 games in, Jared. Like, you are what you are, right? You can tweak some things. You can make some adjustments. You can improve on things throughout the season. But you pretty much are what you are. And right now, they're a flawed team because of their defense.
He's Raymond Partsch III, ESPN Southwest Louisiana for Louisiana versus all y'all, Jared Rosen. Make sure you tune in to Ray and company throughout the day, but Ray in particular midday on weekdays. Appreciate you, man.
Appreciate you always, brother. Keep up the tremendous work, man.